So, hello everyone. It's a great pleasure to have Daniela Barbosa and Joel Curado on this Blockchain Factory webinar. The purpose is to actually share some thoughts and then have an informal conversation and hear out both Daniela and Joel on their past experience and the present experience in terms of blockchain projects. And for that, I'm just going to briefly introduce Daniela and Joel, and then they'll have a brief conversation or a brief presentation on what they're doing and what is their view on the present status of blockchain, especially enterprise blockchain. And then we'll have a Q&A that will cover questions that maybe the audience will actually have some questions. So in terms of presenting, I think that both Linux Foundation and Hyperledger Foundation needs no presentations, as well as Casper Labs, but Daniela, she leads the global community for open source developers. She's also a writer and author, and she's an engaged professional in the development communities. And Joel is the managing director of business development at Casper Labs. So this is, I believe this is going to be a great conversation to hear their experience and to learn from them. So I'll just pass the word to Daniela and hear what have you been up to?
Olá. E for those of us who speak Portuguese, eu vou começar a dizer bom-vindo. Meu nome é Daniela Barbosa. Eu sou portuguesa, nasci em Portugal, mas vim para os Estados Unidos quando tinha 10 anos. So, já vivo a maioria da minha vida aqui em Portugal, mas na América. Mas volto muitas vezes para Portugal para ver a minha família. So it's a pleasure to be here today, and Rui and the equipe aí, thank you for inviting the Hyperledger Foundation to come and share some of the work that we've been doing. And I have a couple of slides that I think are really illustrative of where the community is. And can you see my slideshow?
Yes.
Okay, great. And really talking about, thinking about what your coursework is around enterprise blockchain and Web3, and how the Hyperledger community has been working on this. There are some challenges. There continue to be challenges in the marketplace when it comes to using blockchain as a technology into critical infrastructure and critical systems worldwide. And it continues to be one about how the media portrays or how people see blockchain. I've been using this slide since 2017 when I joined the Hyperledger project to educate, to let people know that crypto is a killer app on top of blockchain. It's an application that uses blockchain technologies, but blockchain does not only equal crypto. And I still think that there's a lot of education that's needed. And just as we think that we're about to make progress and people understand what is blockchain and how do I use blockchain as a technology, we run into issues like what happened with FTX/Share. And the bottom line is fraud is fraud. Bad business practices are not unique to the blockchain industry. What SBF and the rest of his crew at FTX did is no different than many of the other Ponzi schemes across any technology, any industry. So I want to just remind people that it is a message that we need to continually to say is that blockchain does not equal crypto, and more importantly, fraud, things that happen in the marketplace do not equal it. And I think I'm not the only one that is concerned, because when this happens, regulation certainly can grow, can start slowing down enterprise projects as well. And depending on where you are worldwide, the government is certainly looking in how they regulate blockchain and blockchain-related technologies, specifically in the crypto space. So I do think that it does slow down, but there's an opportunity for us to really, from a technology perspective, really address the fact that the blockchain technology is not equal to some of the crypto business out there. So when the FTX debacle happened in 2022, what did we see? We saw major banks, for example, Goldman Sachs, BNY Mellon, Fidelity, Citi, come out and basically, in very simple terms say, what we built and what we're building is not related to the crypto market, but it is leveraging the technology. And a lot of that technology has been technology that has been worked on and part of the Hyperledger Foundation. So for those of you who do not know the Hyperledger Foundation, we are an open source nonprofit, really working around enterprise, what we call enterprise blockchain technologies. And it's not just for enterprise use cases, but it is enterprise grade. So really creating an environment where it's neutral and collaborative for developers and end users to come and work together in, and really building on industry best practices as well. And I just want to let everybody know, I will make these slides available for everybody at the end of my talk, and there's lots of great links, lots of opportunities to look at use cases and case studies. For Hyperledger, we are a diverse ecosystem. We're really addressing many use cases, potentially some that you've been learning about in some of your coursework around finance and healthcare and telecom, supply chain, trade finance, public sector. So really across the board, we're generally the use of blockchain increases the core efficiencies and the core ROI that people want to use blockchain for in regards to using distributed ledgers. Another key thing that the Hyperledger Foundation has been really focused on is that open source development is essential for Web3 and blockchain. And we're seeing this across the board, all technologies, where open source is being used across various industries, use cases, where 78% of companies are now using open source, and 63% of them are participating in open source communities like the Hyperledger Foundation. And we really believe that open source development for Web3 and blockchain is essential. And why that is because just the premise of open source, it enables a company to reshape their industry value chain, to create industry platforms. And if you think about a lot of these blockchain networks, they become industry platforms, or the goal is for them to become industry platforms that really drive competitive goals of the industry and the players in the industry, but through active stakeholdership. And open source is very much aligned with how blockchain and blockchain networks are participating in the ecosystem. At the Hyperledger Foundation, we continue to grow. We have over 40,000 contributors and many 1.27 million contributions over the last 5 years, and new members join. We are open source consortium. Anyone can participate, but our members, as you see here, these are supporting members of the foundation, and we continue to grow because people understand the importance of working openly and collaboratively in the foundation. And the momentum, whether it is through our meetup communities or through our regional chapters, the different projects that we bring in, really continues to grow. But I want to take with you very quickly, and I swear this is going to be a very fast forward Hyperledger history, but more importantly, the enterprise blockchain history, because I think as you think about where these projects have been and where they're going to, why is it important for us to work on these things collaboratively here at the Hyperledger Foundation with our global community as well? So thinking of, where the Hyperledger Foundation started in 2015, we had the Bitcoin white paper already out in 2008. The Ethereum ecosystem, or the mainnet, was announced in 2014, with its first Genesis block minted in July of 2015. And the Hyperledger project launched in 2015 as well, with 2016 being really the key of these big projects: Hyperledger Fabric, which was contributed by IBM, Hyperledger Sawtooth, which was contributed by Intel, and Iroha and Explorer, coming in to start forming what the Hyperledger community, now known as the Foundation and an umbrella organization, was going to be formed out. Today, this is a report from October of 2022. Hyperledger Fabric continues to be the preferred solution for about 38% of the top 100 companies, and that community continues to grow and really be focused on core use cases in the marketplace. So I've highlighted a couple of them, and during the Q&A, we can talk a bit about this. In supply chain, And supply chain, I've highlighted two case studies that are newer that I think are really important. Circular has actually been working in the electronic vehicle passports and sustainability traceability since 2018. The Botanical Water Gardens just recently launched as well, which is a water exchange to securely track every drop. The thing is, these use cases around tokenized goods or products as they move through the supply chain is one of the key reasons that people use blockchain, right? It is efficiencies, greater traceability, reducing the risk of fraud and counterfeiting. These are all core principles of why organizations and networks would use blockchain technology. Forward to 2017, we started seeing things like identity being really important in the community. The EVM, the Ethereum virtual machine, I mentioned the Ethereum mainnet had launched in 2015. The Ethereum virtual machine became something of interest, and we had a project called Burrow that brought the EVM into the Hyperledger community. And interoperability. How are all these networks going to interact with one another? In the identity space, a decentralized ecosystem continues to grow. Started with Hyperledger Indy, which was an Indy ledger built specifically for identity use cases. Out of that project came Hyperledger Aries, which is a wallet for digital identity, and Hyperledger Non-Creds, which is the protocol for verifiable credentials in handling the proofs. And the use cases that we see across the digital identity ecosystem are really diverse. We're seeing things in the digital identity space in Europe with ID Union, in the US with public services that are using credentials, and in British Columbia around digital trust ecosystems like the Energy and Mines Trust, where the mining industry is now using verifiable credentials to verify where they pulled the minerals from the land into the products and services that those companies build out and serve. An example, and once again, these are all linked in the deck and you can follow through and get more details. The government of British Columbia has launched, so the first digital wallet that a government has launched, and they're one of the main contributors into the Hyperledger community in Hyperledger Indy and Aries. So do check that out. It's a great project, really benefiting it. In 2017 and 2018, we also saw some big launches of some very known use cases. WeTrade, a trade finance use case, and TradeLens, both in 2017 and 2018, launched, both using Hyperledger Fabric. And we know what has happened. We've learned some really great lessons around WeTrade and TradeLens, and I'm sure we'll address this in some of the Q&A later on. But today, trade finance use cases continue to grow. And we call those Trade Finance 2.0. Here's two examples, GSBN. And we have a case study that we've listed that highlights some of the things that they've done that are different from some of the older trade finance use cases, as well as NTD Data working with TradeWaltz out of Asia Pacific. And we have a case study coming soon. So some of the lessons learned from some of those big implementations that have failed, and it is not about the technology, essentially the governance of these ecosystems, are some of the lessons learned that we have heard and brought to market as well. And in 2019, we saw continuously contributions and requirements needed for the ecosystem, including our labs, where now we have over 50 innovative open source labs that are building out the next generation of blockchain technologies and projects. We also saw, and I'm sure you've spent a lot of time thinking about public and permission blockchains. And since the beginning of the Hyperledger Foundation, we've always understood and said there's not one size to fit them all. There are going to be use cases where permissionless public blockchains, whether it's Bitcoin, Ethereum, or the hundreds of others that have since launched, or the need for having a permission private. And we've seen hybrid use cases, and we'll talk about that in a second, as well as use cases that really leverage both sides of what both public and permissioned use cases can be. And in 2019, we did bring in a project called Hyperledger Besu, and Hyperledger Besu is an Ethereum virtual machine, and you can run Hyperledger Besu both as a public mainnet client on the Ethereum mainnet, as well as a private blockchain network. And this is really important as organizations, specifically in financial services, are building systems and they want the optionality to have parity, to basically work very closely with the Ethereum mainnet, to run on Solidity, to run on Ethereum-based EVM specifications, that then they can work both on the public and private blockchain space, and essentially not having to make a decision of I have to go and build my systems in public blockchain, but I can't because, once again, the regulation that I mentioned before won't allow me, but I can start this work and create private chains with the ecosystem partners. And Besu is certainly a place that many people are doing that, including NFT networks. Palm Network just got acquired on Friday by the Candy Network. The Palm Network is built using Hyperledger Besu, and it's a great use case to understand why they're using the Besu as a layer 2 essentially to mainnet, and why that's important in some of these ecosystems. Another thing that I like to very quickly highlight is this new public permission network use cases that we're seeing. Blockchain in Latin America and the Caribbean with the Inter-American Development Bank, and in Europe with the European Blockchain EBSI, which is a European Commission and European Blockchain Partnership that is creating a public permission network. So it's publicly available as a network, but it's permissioned due to its governance requirements. And both of these use cases are using Hyperledger Besu as well. There's lots of work happening in digital currencies that our ecosystem here at Hyperledger are forming. Two examples: the Banque de France with their wholesale CBDC using Hyperledger Fabric and Cacti, as well as the token SDK. And recently, the Banco Central do Brasil announced their selection of Hyperledger Besu for their CBDC projects as well. And we work very closely with the central banks worldwide as they adopt and contribute. Over 105 countries, according to the Atlantic Council, are now using or experimenting either in production or experimentation stages CBDCs. And many of them, as you see here, are driven by the Hyperledger ecosystem, with Hyperledger Fabric and Hyperledger Besu being two of the main ones. So fast forward to 2022, interoperability becomes an issue and a requirement. So really understanding these networks of networks and how they interoperate. So we have projects called Hyperledger Cacti that are addressing the need for interoperability between these networks. And as we go through the need for enterprises and organizations to easily deploy, not having to create these very complex protocol level projects, but how do you deploy blockchain networks? And we have projects like Hyperledger Firefly that really address the requirements of multi-chain applications, and being able to build Web3 apps without reinventing the wheel, without having to constantly create custom code and plumbing. So without a tool like Hyperledger Firefly, many organizations are building all this out: the business applications, the tokens, the identity, the privacy, but then using Firefly and really focusing on the business application. What do you want this blockchain network to really, really be focused on, and where is your value add? And letting the complexity of creating networks really be handled by Firefly, and then being able to choose what change you want. Do you want to do it on a public chain like Ethereum or Polygon or Algorand, or do you want to create it on a permissioned blockchain like Fabric or Besu or Quorum or even Corda as well? So lots of great things that continue to happen within our community that are really addressing, as I said before, how enterprises are moving from a very permissioned blockchain 2015 model, which is still very valid for many of these use cases to some newer use cases as well. And we're seeing things like real world assets and gold, real estate being representative as digital tokens. We're seeing lots of use cases around what we call hybrid blockchains. And this is a blockchain deployment which allows the value to safely exchange across permissioned or private and permissionless or public blockchains. And I'm going to pass it over to Joel, who's going to talk a bit about how Casper, a Hyperledger member in our community, does that with some of our other ecosystem players as well.
Thank you so much, Daniela.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a very, very nice continuation, because we at Casper Labs, we actually started in 2018. And our objective was, when we look at pioneers like Hyperledger Foundation, we also started to look into what is a public blockchain, a private blockchain. How can we build capabilities that can help the adoption of blockchains? And to Daniela's point, no blockchain will rule them all. You will have always different capabilities that you need to deploy. Just think about the blockchain as an operating system, right? And when we started to look into Casper Labs and what we could build as a capability, we thought about what are the pain points for governments, for enterprises, that are hindering these blockchains from being implemented, from being adopted, and from being consumed. So first of all, we would think about what we would call proprietary languages, right? The programming languages. Some languages will be very difficult for enterprises or governments to adopt, like Solidity or Bluetooth or many others. And languages like Hyperledger, the one that Hyperledger uses, Casper, which is now what we would call a third generation blockchain, enables an easier access to coding and to building on top. And I'm talking about languages like Rust, WebAssembly, Go, and others, right? And in that sense, we are moving forward from a complex programming language to a more close to the reality of many enterprises. And that really helps when enterprises want to build on top of their own capabilities, of their own ERPs, their own CRMs, and integrate other solutions that will bring that privacy, that element of audit and compliance that is needed. Of course, when we look at about blockchains, we always think about these concepts of forking, right? What is forking? It's when you're trying to upgrade a blockchain, but sometimes forking as a concept might bring issues, right? So this upgrade path, or this unclear upgrade path, needs to be addressed in a different way. And Casper Labs, for instance, is one of many that is also looking at blockchains as a pure software company and pure software play. So upgradability and upgrade of the capabilities is done as if it is more of a software application, meaning that it's easier, it doesn't break, and it builds over time. Of course, interoperability is key, as I mentioned, and we, Casper Labs, are members of the Hyperledger Foundation. We've been working closely with Danielle and the team, and with our customers, joint customers, in which we are addressing joint capabilities together that enrich the business capabilities of the customer, so that the customer can focus on what they need to focus, which is their business. We act as technology enablers at the end of the day. Another point that I think it's important is cost predictability. If you are in the space for some time, you have heard about gas fees, which is the ability of a blockchain to be operated and managed. When you're having transactions from point A to point B, you have the validators, you have the different nodes that register the information of the blockchain in their own ledgers. So in that sense, it is important for enterprises to say, I want to deploy a enterprise-grade solution that is robust, that is secure, that solves the trilemma of blockchain, of security, scalability, and having all the different elements coming together, but also at a low cost, maintaining a low OPEX. And that is also key, because when you're working in a space like this, you need to think, am I going to create new services, or I'm going to reduce my OPEX on existing services? And that is a premise on any enterprise, and that's where we enter. We've started to look into these components, and of course, bringing features and flexibility that enterprises need by having a better experience. And I'll share a bit more on some of the use cases that we're working on. But in essence, as Casper Labs, we focus on working with our community in building these capabilities, building what we would call the foundation of the Web3 in terms of infrastructure, application deployment, development in the layer 2, and working with an ecosystem of partners worldwide to deploy these applications. But of course, these characteristics like transparency, mutability, security really need to be aligned with what I was just mentioning, right? Efficiency of processes, cutting costs, aligned with privacy, GDPR regulation, and new service creation. All concepts that we know from our day-to-day. But then I think what is interesting here today and what I want to share with all of you is, how does this come to life? How can you think about these concepts and apply them to your day-to-day business, to your day-to-day capabilities? Okay. And I'm just going to talk about a few examples here of projects that we've been doing, real projects that we've been doing, and I'll also afterwards pass a bit to the capabilities that we're working in public sector as well, just for you to have a glimpse of both sides. And to Daniela's point in terms of what we're doing with IPWE, it's a great example, right? So IPWE is a company that is doing patent management and for businesses and governments. And what they're doing is they've created their own platform in which they are now minting in the Casper blockchain up to 25 million patents as NFTs. What does this mean is that you are transforming an asset, a patent, which traditionally would be illiquid, into a liquid asset, basically. And this is what we would call asset tokenization. It is a proof of certificate of origin. So meaning that you can manage that patent as an NFT and you can understand where it came from, who owns it. You can manage a portfolio of patents, and with that you can optimize through algorithms that the IPWE team themselves have built on top of it to maximize profitability in terms of its patents. But also at the same time, it's a great way through their marketplace that we're working with them also to buy and sell these patents. So as I said, it's about transforming an asset that is illiquid into liquid, giving tokenization elements for proof of authenticity, and from an audit and compliance standpoint, to have everything in a single pane of glass in a platform. In terms of what we've been doing with Hyperledger Foundation, of course, was we already started to give these first steps into building what we would call an atomic swap that would connect both platforms, the interoperability play, meaning that we can connect Hyperledger assets with Casper assets, meaning that you can move from one platform to the other. It is interesting because both have different capabilities, and through that atomic swap, we can actually go from one to the other. We are actually doing that with IPWE, and that was the use case that Daniela mentioned. But of course, the objective is to increase the changing needs of enterprises of both customers and move forward by bringing added new capabilities. Another great use case that we're working with today is with Metacask. Metacask is a company from our good friends in Switzerland that are managing high value assets. So we are in essence tokenizing whiskey casks. A whiskey cask will be a very big thing. It will be able to transport 200 bottles of whiskey in terms of liquid. And it is usually an item that is difficult to acquire, difficult to manage. But by having this marketplace in place, you are able actually to acquire an NFT with this whiskey cask and follow the life cycle from the distillery to the warehouse where it's going to be stored. This is another great use case of what we would call high value assets. And then again, tokenization. It could be done with any type of asset with regards to the world. What do you think? It can be clothing, it can be watches, it can be any type of luxury markets or any type of track and trace logistics. We've also been working with a company called WiseKey in connecting our blockchain platform to IoT devices. And that's really great use case because WiseKey actually, through their WiseSat platform, they actually deployed a network of picosatellites. So they are leveraging picosatellites to retrieve real-time data of IoT sensors, sending them to the Casper blockchain. So this is great in terms of compliance and auditing to register this type of information, which they can then leverage for both governments or enterprises. We've also been working in China with BSN to actually customize a blockchain that needed to be aligned with the high levels of regulation from China. And in that sense, we are enabling citizens to actually have different types of services in the blockchain, which is what we would call a tokenless blockchain in this case. So to Daniela's slide in the beginning, in which crypto is different from blockchain, in certain regions of the world, that is taken very seriously. And with regards to this use case, the focus was to remove the crypto element of blockchain to make it that it would be a solid, just blockchain technology operating system and make it possible to build services on top. Types of services can be anything from identity management with wallets. It can be anything from I want to have my own wallet with an NFT that has my COVID vaccination report. That can also happen. If I acquire a land in my country, I might have a registry and so on. And the possibilities, to be fair, are endless when you think that you can tokenize any service or any output of this service, and you as a citizen can consume it. Last but not least, and two very interesting use cases were we identified from the beginning that financial services were also a very important part of blockchain as a way to transform that market and that vertical. So we actually got together with a Swiss software company, and we did a joint venture called Nucleus Finance, in which we addressed what we would call financial smart contracts. And these financial smart contracts are all about creating the baseline of what is Web3 for banking, okay? And to give you two good examples of what that would look like, we're working today with the government of Telangana in India for invoice tokenization. So for those who know what factoring is all about, it's the ability to actually improve liquidity between suppliers and governments when you want to accelerate the rate of payment between these suppliers and between these government entities. And what we are doing is we're creating a platform in which we are tokenizing these invoices to make it possible to accelerate the liquidity of the payment of such invoices, meaning that from a government perspective, from an economic growth perspective, things can move faster. And you bring more ecosystem players into the mix, and you can accelerate innovation through this buying and selling of products between suppliers and state, which for many suppliers, it's a challenge around the world. But through platforms such as this, we aim to reduce friction and to make things more easy to consume and to acquire. And last but not least, we're working with a leasing company, one of the biggest ones here in Switzerland. And what we're doing is we actually tokenized their leasing contracts so that they could have a better life cycle management. And that's very interesting because we're talking about leasing contracts can go up to billions of dollars of volume. And what we're doing is we're improving through smart contracts the ability to actually manage this life cycle. Through a smart contract, you can trigger certain actions. Let's imagine if the contract is arriving to the end, to trigger an alarm, you can trigger different events within the smart contract so that every player within the process is aware of what's happening at any given time. So this generates efficiency in operations, reduces human error, it creates more security within the platform, and of course, as I mentioned already a couple of times, from an auditing and compliance standpoint, it's a great mix. Okay, I want to very quickly just go through this slide because I want to give also time for the Q&A, but just to mention that, in public sector, we're already seeing a very deep set of use cases that can use blockchain, okay? IDC, Gartner, and many others already started to map these types of areas of priority and use cases. And we see already customers coming to us, even governments, to understand how can they leverage, how can they create new experiences, how can they focus on providing this type of digital platform that enables better experiences to call tourists, to call citizens, and to improve the livability of their communities in the place that they live. A couple of examples here that I find very interesting is, for instance, the focus of digital currencies or tourism in the economic development, NFTs for local heritage. So how can you transform the tourism experience in cities using Web3 capabilities, which is very interesting in terms of innovation and calling the tourists. Another area that I find interesting is in smart ports. How can you better manage port capability? And of course, if you think about intelligence transportation, excuse me, and if you think about certain capabilities like battery life cycle management, or even I have an EV plug-in car and I want to charge it in a station, it is very easy to have your own identity in a digital wallet, Web3, and manage the whole charging of the vehicle and registration of the data through your own wallet, through your own identity in the blockchain. Okay, so these are, as I mentioned, some of the use cases that we see are happening that will move into mainstream in the next few years, and that companies like Casper, Hyperledger and many others are currently building in order to make this a reality. So that this is not just a PowerPoint, but in a few years, you'll be able to actually use and leverage, okay? Now, you might think, okay, but can Casper build this alone? No, we actually work with actually more than 100 partners today. I just put here a few so that you can understand the capabilities where we're going. We need to build partnerships in foundation. And when I mean foundation, I mean data center like AWS, Google. We're working with Hyperledger in improving these capabilities. We're working with IBM and many other companies in activating not only capabilities for their customers and us, but also develop products that will be leveraged in the future. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll pass it to Rui so that if there's any questions.
Yes, there are. So probably I will not be asking the questions, which is great. I had a couple of questions ready, but it's always best to have the audience to ask the question. So I'll start with the last one, which is about the actual live implementation or live production use cases, both with Hyperledger and Casper. I think that it would be great that you could hear what specifics for the audience is real live operating solutions versus more on a prototype or more on a POC basis. Maybe you can share that with us.
Daniela?
Joel, do you want to? You can go first, and then
Okay, sure.
I'll catch what you don't catch.
Okay, cool. Couple of examples. I mean, IPV I already mentioned, right? So in essence, it's the ability to actually mint NFTs that can be moved from both blockchains, from Hyperledger and Casper Labs, and through their platform. What IPV is looking now is to enrich their ecosystem by bringing companies that leverage patents in the technology space, mostly, that they have their own sets of patents and that they can better manage it in these marketplaces. You need to understand that just because you built a technology platform, it really doesn't work if you don't have the companies there. So you need to bring the ecosystem into life by doing that. One thing that I really enjoy about IPV and the team that is extremely hardworking is that they're looking at things like jewels, which is they identify really good patents out of their own portfolio that traditionally they would not identify because of the algorithm capabilities that they leverage. So they use blockchains as a baseline for storage of data, but then they build what we would call, this is what we would call a layer 2 application on top of the blockchain, in which in essence, through their algorithms, they're able to derive more value to their customers. And I think that's where the secret sauce is. How do you derive value to your customers, and how you leverage the blockchain as a building block for security, for compliance, for auditing. Daniela?
Right.
Mm-hmm. So for us, and I think a lot of the use cases that I covered when I did my presentation are in production and have been in production for quite a while. So I'll just highlight a couple ones that I think are important because you have real active networks with hundreds of participants. Now, some of these networks might not have where each participant is running their own node. So back in 2016, when people were thinking about blockchains and networks, very often it was every single company had to run their own node, right? And that would be the only way that a blockchain would, a blockchain network would work. And what we're seeing is that there are some requirements where individual participants of the network are not running their own node, but are rather participating in a like a shared node or in some other different ways. And the different platforms, whether it's Fabric or Base or others, do allow for that functionality. So that's the first thing. So I think when looking at what's in production and how big the network is, sometimes those questions need to be asked. Is it really truly one individual company or organization running a node? So a couple of the case studies I mentioned that I think are worth the students and people thinking, and researching blockchain. One is Circular, which since 2018 has been building with Hyperledger Fabric, and Circular's use case is primarily the mine to car, mine as in not Bitcoin mining, but as in actual, mining of minerals out of the land. And how do you trace something that comes out of the earth in one way and then is presented ultimately, in a different way at the end product, and even when the end product needs to be recycled. So Circular, the company, has basically built a platform that does two things. One is, if you think about these very important minerals that our earth gives us, and very often they're mined in situations where it is not beneficial to the people that live in that area who actually own those minerals. So one of the things that we're seeing more and more, as in even governments, the European Union has passed legislation recently around the battery passport, which is about the lithium and other minerals that are used for electronic vehicle batteries, and making sure two things happen. One is that you can trace down to the fact that it is being mined out of the land sustainably, and not using slave labor, for example, and that you can tell where these mines came from. And then the second is, from a circularity perspective, hence the name Circular, is how do you make sure at the end of the life cycle of that electronic vehicle battery, for example, how do you make sure that the pieces can then be recycled? And the only way to do that is that it has to be transparent in how the minerals move, and the minerals feel like one thing when they come out of a mine and then look very different. So how do you make sure that you track that? So it has to be, there has to be traceability. And there has to be, basically being able to say, this is immutable data. This came from this supplier before I got to it, and it hasn't been changed, right, as you go through. But that then does bring up the garbage in, garbage out, or garbage in, garbage forever in this use case, sometimes with blockchain. So I would recommend everyone looking at Circular, because they have since 2018, and Volvo and some of the biggest car manufacturers are actively, I think they have over 100 plus companies that are participating in that one as well. Others, Food Trust, the Walmart Food Trust use case also launched in 2017, food traceability. A very important, early network using blockchain technology for sure, still very active. But if you think about even in Europe right now, there's the new regulation around sustainable agriculture. So when products are going to be brought into the European Union, they have to make sure that they pass sustainability from a forest deforestation, right? So making sure that your coffee and your other, coffee, chocolate, etc., are being mined, are being farmed in places that are not deforesting, that are not killing all the trees. That legislation, a lot of the work that's being done in our community and has been over the years around supply chain management is being used. Our Hyperledger technology projects, particularly Hyperledger Fabric, and those are in production as well.
Danielle, I'm going to have to accelerate because we have some incoming questions. So
go ahead.
So here's another one, which relates to interoperabilities, and what are the interoperability challenges when integrating Hyperledger or when integrating Casper with existing legacy systems or even with other blockchains, and how can these challenges be addressed?
Okay,
so I'm going to ask you like punchy replies.
So two things.
Yeah.
One is interoperability between enterprise systems is very different than interoperability between blockchains. And I want to be very clear, right?
It's interoperability between blockchain and enterprise systems.
Right. So it's integration, right?
Yeah.
It's integration versus interoperability.
Exactly.
So integration of is a complex business, regardless if you're using blockchain or not, right? So, you are building new infrastructure, new systems that have to tie into your internal ERP systems. It has to tie into your system. That integration work is enterprise, heavy duty, very difficult things to do. And I don't think we have enough time to address that. On the interoperability side, how do you safely move assets from one blockchain to another? Or how do you safely move an asset from a permissioned public blockchain to a public blockchain, and why would you want to do that? Also is a question. Those are things that you have to address. There has to be standards. So there's a couple of the standard organizations like IETF that are working on the standardization of interoperability between blockchains. So you have to have standards, and you also have to be modular, because there's so many different blockchains and different connectors and interop connectors that you would want, that it would be very hard for an organization that maybe is participating in 10 different networks or 100, if you can imagine, right? Different networks. How do you interoperate with all that? Hyperledger Cacti is addressing some of those so that it's really easy to interoperate using standards and using modularity, so you're not building the same thing over and over and over again. And Joel, maybe you can give an example on your side.
Just to say very rapidly that I think auditing is also very important when you're building code and these bridges. The biggest number of what we would call asset stealing in blockchains in terms of interoperability has been through bridges, has been through these elements, because the blockchains themselves traditionally are very safe from a security perspective. The bridges you will find some challenges there in terms of security. So it is important to be on top of those elements to make it as robust as possible for the enterprise space. And to Daniela's point, at Casper Labs, like we're about 100 people, something like that. 2/3 are engineering, and they're old school professional services from the web to space. And that is why we have the team there, because we understand how complex it is to integrate these systems with these ERPs and CRMs that already are existing. So you need people with expertise in those systems and how to connect them with the Web3. Rui.
Okay, incoming another one. So the blockchain, the Bitcoin blockchain is known for its inefficiency in mining, specifically proof of work, and that consumes an unreasonable amount of energy. Are the Hyperledger technologies more sustainable in that sense? And can you give, I would say, a fair comparison in terms of carbon footprint analysis?
Yeah. So none of the Hyperledger projects that are DLTs, distributed ledgers, use proof of work. which is the what Bitcoin runs on proof of work. So we do not support proof of work either. I mean, Bitcoin has its own use cases. So that's number one. And if you think about, we also don't have, none of the Hyperledger projects have native crypto or native coins. So the incentives are very different in running a network that uses Hyperledger Fabric or Hyperledger Besu or any of the others. The incentives are very different than a proof of work network like Bitcoin as well. And hence why a lot of organizations, governments, when they look for a distributed ledger, they're going to be looking at the Hyperledger technologies that are very more, climate friendly, I guess one would say as well. We have a couple of white papers that we put out, down to even last year we did one on NFTs specifically, and why doing NFTs on a platform, for example, like the Palm Network, is really the way that some of these large companies should really address if they want to do an NFT in their markets as well.
Perfect.
Joel?
Okay.
To Casper's point, we are a third generation blockchain, 100% proof of stake, to Daniela's point. And we actually, if you go to our blog at casperlabs.io, you will see that we did a comprehensive energy efficiency study in which we actually got to understand that we are 99% more energy efficient than Bitcoin, than Ethereum, in terms of consumption of energy and how we do the things we do. We also, two other points that I think are important is also programmable smart contracts, the ability to build on top of a smart contract. So that means that you don't have to destroy the NFT and then remint the smart contract itself, which means that you have energy savings and cost savings. And of course, the way we've built the hybrid network makes it possible to be more efficient as well. Yeah.
So I'm heading towards one of the last questions, then I'll have a couple of mine. But basically, the question relates to IPv and the planning of releasing a case study report about the experience and lessons learned on IPv. And based on that, I'll have my own question. So maybe you can share the IPv status. Let's put it this way.
It's I would say from my side, it's still in progress. The team is starting to roll out the whole project. I would say it's a bit early yet for a case study. A case study would take 6 to 9 months of data on a production level environment to then write a solid paper about the work they're doing, but it's going in a good direction, that I can tell you. Okay. I will not, from an NDA perspective, I will not mention much, but I do know that network activity is happening and the team is moving forward.
We have a webinar on hyperledger.org in the webinar area where the president of IPW, who's married to a Portuguese person, actually, Leanne Pinto, did a great presentation around what they've built.
Okay, great. So my questions now, how is it like to sell enterprise-grade blockchains or DLTs in what I would call a crypto disillusioned world, on our crypto winter and a crypto disillusioned world? Because what we're I couldn't agree more with Daniela that blockchain is not crypto, and crypto sometimes contaminates blockchain. So how do you manage to keep the spirit alive, keep the hope, keep the good momentum about such a great game-changing technology being infested by some really lousy projects in crypto? How do you do that? That's the question for both of you guys.
So, I mean, I'll start. I mean, the Hyperledger Foundation, we're a nonprofit organization. We actually don't sell anything. We don't have any products or services, but we have a community of hundreds, thousands of organizations that do sell, enterprise blockchain. And I have to tell you, every single day I find new use cases, new people building, with Hyperledger tech. And very often I'll be talking to a large company and they tell me about what they built with Hyperledger. and I'll say, okay, let's say Hyperledger Fabric, they have, some supply chain use case that they built out. They have hundreds of people already on it. And I say, great, can you please help me tell your story? And they say, no, because my corp com people, my corporate communications and PR people say absolutely not. My compliance people say absolutely not. And why are they saying that? Because of the word blockchain. And it's like my crusade is that one day blockchain will not be about a dirty word. But I think it is about talking about the core principles of what blockchain brings to the table: efficiencies, transparency, right, immutability, growth in networks beyond just in the big vendor way. That is important, that when we should be focused on when we sell these solutions, not on the fact that it's blockchain. We're not going to get there if that's what we sell, what you all sell, because I don't sell anything.
I usually would say, after 15 years at Cisco, in which, established company, very easy to position any product, going to blockchain is 50 times harder, because of all of the above mentioned things. And scandals like FTX really don't help. What I can tell you is that when the team is committed, when the team believes in the product, when the team believes in what I just mentioned on the slide, which is how can we make your processes more efficient? How can we reduce operational costs for the company? How can we create new services? All of that is about value creation to the customers, and how we can help our customers be successful. Then that's when we are successful. And I think that's the important message here, because I don't want to think much about blockchain. I want to think about a technology that is disruptive and emerging in itself and can help transform the products and the capabilities of other enterprises. So for that, and having a team that is committed and expert, that's key for the success.
Yeah. And having just 2 minutes to close, I'll just give a minute to both of you, and just with a very simple question, which is, what are the lessons from the trenches? I'm sure Cisco has lessons from the trenches. The trade lens may have brought some lessons out from in or from that project into the market. What if you were to advise someone that is building a blockchain project as of today? What kind of insights and experience would you like to at least share with them?
I'll start. First, open source and open development. There were a lot of failures even outside of the Hyperledger community with proprietary software. And that's, you need to focus on being open source and open development code bases. The second is we're early on. Right. I mean, some of us have been, we're like, oh, we've been here 10 years. It feels like 30 years, honestly, because of the way that the market is. But, we're early on. And if we're really talking about enterprise software, the enterprise software market is not fast moving. It is not, so we have to decide that there's going to be some more big failures before we get it right and then move on to the next big thing. So we're early on, open source, open development first. And be open to actually saying that blockchain is not for me. Don't start with, I want to build a blockchain thing, but rather, what am I going to build and what do I need to build? And is blockchain one of the technologies I should be looking at? If you start with I'm building a blockchain thing, you're going to have another, Long Island iced tea blockchain business, and nobody wants that.
And to complement to Daniela, culture of innovation. Thinking about, as a company, how can I build capability inside the company so that I can take the product of whatever I create forward for the long term. I think a lot of companies, or what we would call first generation companies that started to build blockchain capabilities, did POCs, and they never thought about production level solutions and long term. And I think it's important to think long term, from technical capability, from an organizational department and structure, and how does the blockchain technology will enable your systems and connect with your systems. That's important.
Okay, we've passed the hour. Even before I do some thank you notes, I'd like to ask the audience if they have any further questions. If not, It's been a pleasure to digitally connect with you, and thank you very much for your insights, your experience, your just to share. It's really great, and thank you for your time. And if you'd like to share with us any more insights, Porto Business School is really open to connecting with you guys. Thank you again. Thank you, Daniela. Thank you, Joel. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so
Prazer,
much.
prazer foi meu. Bom dia.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.